In this video, we are going to learn about the normalize effect. What normalize does to our voiceover. So the recording you see on the screen is a raw recording, and if I normalize this audio to something or to some value, what will happen? To understand that, you have to look at the peak level of the audio, peak level of the current audio. So you can think of a line on the top half and the bottom half of the waveform, and the maximum point it touches that line is the peak amplitude. Now, that is the visual way to understand what is the peak amplitude, but you can technically measure that what the current peak level of the audio is. You can do that by going to the window and then amplitude statistics. And when you open the amplitude statistics, then scan it. And after scanning, you can see some of the results about this waveform on the amplitude statistics. And the top result is the peak amplitude, which is minus 12.78 dB. So if I normalize the audio, then the peak amplitude of this audio will set to the value which I will normalize. For example, if I go to the favorites menu, then we can see couple of shortcuts about the normalize effect. One is the normalize to minus 0.1 dB and another one is the normalize to minus 3 dB. So let's say I choose the normalize to minus 3 dB. Normalizing to minus 3 dB is the industry standard, and if you are publishing audiobooks, you are required to set your peak level to below minus 3. So there is a shortcut for that, and it also works for voiceover. So what will happen if I normalize to minus 3 dB? If I normalize to minus 3 dB, the peak, which is minus 12.78 now, will reach to minus 3. That means from minus 12, it is going to be minus 3. So a 9 dB increase for this audio or this recording. So that is the theory, and to actually understand that that theory is correct, what we can do, we can first listen to the current recording a bit and then normalize and then listen to it again. So let's listen to it.
Some people claim that all aerators are created equal. Well, we beg to differ.
Well, you listen to the original recording and it looks like a bit of low volume compared to the narration I am giving, and now we will normalize it to minus 3 dB. I'll go to favorites and then I'll click normalize to minus 3 dB. So now the audio waveform has grown, it has become taller, and if you draw those imaginary line to above the waveform at which point it touches, you can now see that at the bottom of this waveform it is touching minus 3. So it can, the highest point can be at the top or at the bottom, but the main point is that the peak amplitude now changed to minus 3, and we can verify that from the amplitude statistics. If I click on scan, you can see the peak amplitude is now saying minus 3.01 dB. So after normalizing, the peak has been set to minus 3.01 as we set in the favorites menu. And if we listen to this audio, we'll see the loudness level of the audio has increased.
Some people claim that all aerators are created equal. Well, we beg to differ.
So you see the loudness level of this audio has increased after the normalize effect. But it is not the case that will happen every time, because the volume level of this audio has increased because the peak level before normalize was less than the value we normalize after. So it was minus 12.78 before, and I normalized to minus 3 dB. That's why the volume increase. So if I have an audio which has a much higher peak value than the new peak value I set through the normalize, then you won't listen this kind of increase in the volume level. Let me show you an example. On the screen, you can see another recording at which the peak amplitude seems almost touching the 0 dB. So what will happen if I normalize this to minus 3? I will first scan to make sure which is the peak level, current peak level of this audio. So we can see that it is saying it is minus 0.1. And if I normalize to minus 3, what will happen? The peak will actually come down from 0.1 to minus 3. So there will be a decrease in the volume and the overall waveform will shrink in size. Let's see that. So you can see that the waveform has now shrunk, or it has become smaller in size, smaller in height. And if I scan, what will happen? If I scan, you can see the peak amplitude is now minus 3.01. So it does not mean that normalize will always increase your volume level. Normalize will adjust your loudness level based on the peak level you set. So that is the main point to understand about the normalize, that normalize adjusts the volume level of your audio. It does not increases or decreases by default. So it does that based on the what is your current level and what is the new level you are setting through the normalize. So that's how the normalize works. If someone says you what is the purpose of the normalize effect, you will say the purpose of the normalize is to adjust the volume level. So that is the main point about the normalize effect. And another thing you should note that normalize is not only done by this favorite menu. There is another way to normalize. You can go to effect, and if you go to amplitude and compression, then you can see there is the option normalize process. And in this normalize process, you can set the percentage and the dB. So there are two options, percentage and dB, but we should use the dB because most of the times the requirements are in a specific dB value. And for the ACX audiobook, it is -3, and it will also work for voiceover. So, but we do not need to use the normalize through this effect because we have a shortcut on the favorites menu. If we go to favorites, then we can see the normalize to -3 dB has a shortcut, and whenever we need to normalize, we can always do through this one. And also that is the first step of your audio processing. So if you want to make your sound better, then the first step will be normalize to -3 dB, as I mentioned in this guide. This is a guide where I described all the steps you need to do to make your sound better. If you want this guide, I will set the link in the description. So from that link, you can get this guide to your email. Thanks for watching, and please comment what type of video you want to watch on Adobe Audition. Thank you so much.